Hello. Today, I'm going to talk about rocket engines. Specifically, this one. So before this video continues, I'd just like to point out the fact that this rocket did not actually go the way I thought it would, so I decided to instead make this video not just about one, but about all three types of rocket engines that I'm going to describe in this video. So having said that, let's get back to past me talking all about rocket engines. This is my version 1 hybrid rocket engine. But before I explain how it works, I first have to explain what a rocket engine even is. So let's say you have something you want to move, something like a car. It already has wheels, so it's easy to push, but you want it to move on its own. How do you get it to move? Well, you'd spin the wheels. But why would that make it drive forward? A long time ago, a man named Isaac Newton developed 3 laws that all physics abide by. One of them, the third, being that if any natural force occurs, there's an equal and opposite reaction force. This, in fact, is what causes the car to drive forward when you spin the wheels. You see, when you spin the wheels, you make a friction force against the ground opposite the direction you want to move. Because the Earth has a lot more mass than you do, it doesn't move very far at all. Whereas the car has a lot less mass, and the reaction force is able to drive it forwards. Now let's imagine you want to fly. You have an object with wings, but there's no longer a road to push off on. So instead, you use what you can grab, the air. You have 2 engines, each of which suck in air, mix it with fuel, ignite it, and shoot it out the end, causing it to expand and speed up, giving it more force. This force coming out the back has an equal force pushing the plane forward. What if you want to go higher and go to space? Well, in space, there's no longer a road to push off against or air to throw backwards, so instead you have to carry all of your mass with you. And scientists found the best way to do this is to carry supercooled oxygen and fuel inside of the rocket with you and burn it in the engine to cause the expanding gases to push you forward. There are 3 types of rocket engines. Liquid, which is the most common, where the fuel and oxidizer are both fluids. Solid rocket engines, like those that sent the space shuttle into space, where the fuel and oxidizer are both solid. And hybrid rocket engines, where you have one of each. Most commonly having a solid fuel and a fluid or liquid oxidizer. The solid rocket engine is powerful but simple. The liquid rocket engine is complex but throttleable, and this is just an awkward mix between the two. But despite them not being used for any modern rocketry, I decided to give the hybrid rocket engine a chance and make my own. But before I talk all about hybrid rocket engines, let's start with the basics. Solid rocket engines. Solid rocket engines are composed of 2 main chemicals: a solid fuel, such as aluminum, and a solid oxidizer, such as ammonium perchlorate. These are the 2 primary ingredients in NASA's solid rocket fuel, which I don't suggest you recreate at home. The chemicals are then mixed with a rubber composite, which is also flammable, and cast into a cylindrical shape with a hole down the center, and then they are stacked into the solid rocket boosters. When ignited, the boosters burn from the inside out, with the exhaust gases passing through tight nozzles, propelling the gases to a supersonic speed and giving the space shuttle enough thrust to boost its way to orbit. Since I'm not trying to replicate NASA's insane amount of thrust, I decided to use more common and less expensive materials to create my own solid rocket boosters. These chemicals are plain powdered sugar and potassium nitrate, which is commonly sold as stump remover. So I got to work grinding up the potassium nitrate and mixing it in a 65-to-35 ratio by weight with the sugar. After doing so, I put it into a PVC tube with clay plugs on both ends, making a nozzle on one of them, and put it on a skateboard for testing. This was the result.
You filming?
Filming.
Sec. Okay, 3, 2, 1.
But this success didn't stop me from testing NASA's recipe. Unlike the sugar rocket fuel, this fuel is about 75% fuel and 25% oxidizer, the fuel being aluminum powder and the oxidizer being ammonium perchlorate. Again, I don't suggest trying this at home. Not only is it flammable, which is quite obvious, but it also burns extraordinarily brightly, which is why I suggest not looking directly at the flame if you are trying this for yourself. So now that I've explained the basics of, well, the basics, let's move on to hybrid rocket engines. The fuel kind of acts as a flammable straw, with this fuel grain being hollow on the inside to allow pure oxygen gas to go through the center and burn it. This then expands and goes through the nozzle, speeding it up and causing enough thrust to hopefully move the rocket forward. The fuel in this rocket is PVC tubing, which I've always had an issue with since chunks of PVC will randomly be shot out of the end of the rocket. So in this video, I decided to upgrade and try a better design. In this design, I'm going for wax instead of PVC, since when it melts, it becomes watery more than tacky, so it hopefully won't clog up the nozzle. Okay, let's make a fuel grain. To make the fuel grain, I grabbed a piece of steel pipe that I found lying around that should fit in thread into both ends of the rocket. This then fits over a piece of threaded pipe and a piece of wood to hopefully make a good hole for the oxygen to flow through. I will seal the bottom with hot glue to make sure the wax doesn't drip out. So after melting down some wax and lubricating the mold, I was ready to pour. And after underestimating the amount of wax that I had melted down, it was time for the waiting game. So it's been a few hours, and it feels pretty cold and solid. So I think it's time for the moment of truth. Will this all come out in one piece? There's only one way to find out. So, and it also seems my hot glue melted at the bottom, which I didn't really think about. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I think I've gotten as much as I can off. It's time to see if this will come off. Don't you feel that it could get hep? Come on and follow me do. Don't you feel that it could get hep? Come on and follow me do. Don't you feel that it could get hep? Come on and follow me do. Then you get your steady food. You make the joint jump like the gators do. Before I test the rocket, I thought I'd demonstrate the insane effect pure oxygen has on normally not very flammable things, such as rubber tubing. Okay, so this is without oxygen. If it will light. Oh, there it goes. You can see the tube doesn't burn very well. Whereas if I turn on this oxygen tank and let a little bit of oxygen through, and then light it. Ooh. Want me to do it again?
Yeah, that was cool. Wait, I didn't expect that.
As you can see, the oxygen has an enormous effect on ordinary combustion, and I do just want to say, if you are going to try this, I recommend proper safety gear and some sort of connector between the rubber hose and the oxygen tube to keep the flame from traveling back to the tank. So now that I've designed and explained it, let's try this thing out. I would just like to point out that even though my dad and I were certain nothing bad was going to happen, we did have a shield set up in case anything were to go wrong. Okay. Are we ready?
We're ready.
So you're going to put it in. We're going to turn off the gas a little bit. We're going to come back, pull it out, and come behind me.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to keep it open.
Tell me when to go.
Open a second. Wait, I'm going to see when it does it.
There, I heard it.
Okay, you want to start it?
Okay.
Is it in the...
Contact, yep.
Okay, you want to pull it out? Okay, come back. So that did not go as expected. Luckily, we were both safely backed away from the rocket before that happened, but this is still just disappointing. It turns out wax is not a good fuel for solid rockets, since it just kind of liquefies and sprays everywhere. If you have any ideas for other solid rocket fuels for hybrid rocket engines, please tell me in the comments below. Now let's move on to one of my most recent designs, the liquid rocket engine. In a liquid rocket setup, you have two primary tanks, one for fuel and one for oxidizer. A fuel could be something like propane or hydrogen, and the oxidizer is normally oxygen. Both tanks have a fuel line, or oxidizer line, running to a pump, which pumps the fuel into the combustion chamber, where it mixes and ignites. Then the expanding gases are shot out of a nozzle to rapidly accelerate them, which causes the rocket to move forward. This rocket, however, does not have an injection plate, which is where the fuel and oxidizer would normally come out of tiny holes and mix within the combustion chamber. Instead, it has a primary fuel line for propane coming from the backside, or I guess front side, of the combustion chamber, and is sprayed down the center of the rocket engine. Here to the side, I have an oxygen line, which comes in at an angle to the combustion chamber, causing the oxygen to spin and cycle around as it comes out of the nozzle. This allows it to not only mix with the incoming fuel, but this also cools the walls and allows for a barrier to form between the hot burning gases and the walls of the engine to hopefully keep them from melting. Without further ado, let's get to testing. And for the last time, no, you should not try this at home.
Okay, let's go.
Okay.
Okay, so oxygen, then sparkler, then you. Ready?
Yep. Wait. A little bit.
Good.
All the way in?
Good.
At this point, we know how to start the engine, so we're going to slowly decrease in nozzle size until we can get as fast of a flow as possible. All the way in?
All in.
It was at this nozzle size that my dad and I noticed a recurring issue. All the way. Okay, come back here.
Go.
No. Can you take it out?
So you could burn. Go ahead. Gentle.
It's gonna explode again.
We can consistently make a little gun sound.
So I think with that, I'm going to end the video. I hope you learned something new. If you have any ideas for ignition, please tell me in the comments. Subscribe if you enjoyed. Bye for now.